Welcome to the Strategy Mob Podcast. Tune in for everything you need to know to stay in the know regarding the automotive industry. Here's your host, Jason Harris.
Hey, what's going on, Podcast Nation? It is Jason Harris here, and thank you for joining me another episode of Strategy with Jason. Today, I'm talking to Andrew Sweet. We're talking all kinds of cool stuff. We're talking about the industry. We're talking about the future of the industry. We're talking about some branding. We're also talking a little bit how consumers sell their vehicles. So I'm really excited about getting into today's conversation. And Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. We're probably about our year anniversary from seeing each other back in Vegas before.
Dude, isn't that crazy? Is it crazy that it's been a year? It's like it's just boom, like the flash is just gone. It's like it's crazy to think that we were at Las Vegas at NADA, and then I think it was not even a week and a half by the time I got back, where it just went, the world just imploded and everything got shut down, especially at least where I was here in Toronto. Hey, let's do this to kick off kind of today's podcast. For everybody that's watching and listening right now, I thought it's always kind of fun to start off our podcast with a little origin story. So, because I find it super interesting how people got in the business. So Andrew, how did you get started in this crazy little world we call the automotive industry?
So, origin story. The 2-minute version is. My entire background's in sales leadership, mainly in the software space. Did a lot of my growing up with brands like Career Builder and Monster.com in the human capital, talent acquisition space. Actually, most of that time I spent in the healthcare space. So I was like a healthcare expert for a while. And between going from like normal corporate jobs to full-blown entrepreneur, I worked for a company called HireView, helping them start or grow a healthcare practice. And I met Tyler Hall, who's the co-founder in Drivably. And he was already doing a little side hustles. And we got thick as thieves working on a few projects there. And we just kind of decided like, hey, let's do something together. We both knew that we were ready to get out of, I guess, working for other people. And we had a handful of ideas that we thought would be interesting, and I'll never forget it. So at the time I was living in Chicago when we first met. My wife's job brought us out to Arizona, where Tyler lived. And as soon as we got out here, I have a giant whiteboard in my office, which I'm not in my office right now because my wife kicks me out when she works projects. She gets the suite and I get, regulated to the guest bedroom.
Nice.
But we literally mapped out all the industries, what we thought the problems were, and tried to map out what were the established software providers, vendors. And, outside of that, we just said, hey, automotive, really big market, fragmented, a lot of supply chain inefficiencies, like, kind of this old school brick and mortar mentality, like, hey, let's kick around some ideas. And we just kept coming back to it. One, because we both kind of like cars. Tyler had some really cool exposure to the car industry when he was in college. He was, flipping cars to kind of pay his way through college, which was super illegal and how he was doing it. But I think we've gotten
we call those curbsiders, by the way. That's what we call.
Yeah, I think he got through the statute of limitations, so I think I could talk about that. And he actually did a few little cool projects in the automotive space around that same time, but had been away from it for a long while. And we thought it would be a great idea. Like, hey, maybe we could stand up a car dealership and source all of our inventory through the private sector. We're not going to buy from auctions. We're just going to stand up this little independent lot, and we'll buy everything off the street. And we did that. We did it for like a year and a half. It was a very expensive R&D project, which Tyler spent, he probably ran 80% of that thing every day, all day, where I was still moonlighting doing some other stuff. But right away, we started getting exposed to like all the challenges that, people like you and everybody else who've been around the business forever knew about. But the ones that we kept coming back to was like what I would call the tribalism around buying, how the information was given to us or provided to us through the fleet providers or like the other large wholesalers. And I'm like, this is a disaster. So we started building products
it's a little
right away.
bit of a mixed bag there, right? Like it's a tough place to be. I love this. I can picture this in my head, right, Andrew? I can see you and Tyler, big monster whiteboard, probably scribbles all over the bloody thing for days. Then you guys decide, you're like, the hell with it. If we're going to get into this space, we better go out and cut our teeth and do it ourselves. You know, you start buying cars, you start selling cars. I imagine it was an expensive education, but a great education all to get there. So then tell me a little bit, because I love the fact that you guys have, you know, this initiative to helping customers, you know, sell their own cars. And I imagine a lot of what that is just from the pains that you guys have gone through and just kind of learning through it. So, you know, kind of, you know, tell me kind of how that conversation first started, and what would you say, like some of the basic like 101s of how, you know, consumers can sell their cars themselves.
So I mean, like if we go back to our original, let's call it thesis around like, hey, if we buy everything from the public, there's just a ton of more margin in those deals. We could probably charge a premium for those cars, and plus we're probably getting a new retail customer, right? That's the most obvious basic things. What we found in dealing with the customers is that we made it super simple and we didn't lowball them. And like, once they figured it out that it wasn't a scam, like we had no problem getting people to meet with us and want to sell our car. And I mean, Tyler and I, when we were doing this, I mean, we don't, you know, I'd say we don't come off like car guys. We don't use the same tactics in trying to sell or buy the cars. I didn't know anything about the car industry up until 3.5 years ago. And now I instantly know when I meet a car guy, because they say stuff like, hey, can I ask you a question? It's like, I'd never heard that phrase until I started talking with car people. And it's like, this is like apparently a part of training, right? You got to ask questions. I don't know. But from our perspective, it's like sellers are always trying to measure, you know, do I want to wait and make more money? Or do I want to go get mugged in a parking lot at Walmart and sell this thing for like a retail price to some stranger?
Yeah, I hear you.
And it's like that general balance that everybody's trying to achieve. And I mean, people post car on Craigslist, post on Auto Trader, they get hit up by 45 dealerships in their local market, trying to evaluate each one of them on who they want to work with, what price they get. Some are giving them prices over the phone. Some say you got to come in.
All over the place.
You know, it's just all over the place, and nobody's really guiding or educating people through that process. So even back in the day, like that's what we tried to do, and it worked really well. The pivot that we started to make away from focusing on the dealership and focusing on the software is that we're like, because the way that we built that business was we actually used let's call it a bounty system. We started paying friends, family, anybody we could find to send us referrals. We'd actually have this website that was a closed off website that only the people we invited to could see, and they could submit a VIN number and the price it was listed for, and we'd ping that up against an evaluator. And if it came back that there was like spread between the wholesale costs and what they were asking for it got routed to Tyler directly to get on the phone and try to buy the car.
That's pretty cool.
So we originally structured it as like this massive bounty system, and we're like, we got to get the people out of this, and we got to have computers do all this. And the only way you can build a reliable algorithmic way of doing that is you need large tranches of data to start testing and trying, and that really doesn't exist from when a car's posted to the offer to the purchase and then to the actual, let's call it the liquidation of the asset, maybe on a retail side. Like that really doesn't exist soup to nuts. So we said we got to go out and do it ourselves, and we spent 18 months paying data scientists, trying to shake down big time vendors, big time car dealers to just lift up the skirt, give us all the data, and let us play with it. And we did that for 2 years until basically this past 4 or 5 months, we've delivered our first, models that make all that decisioning for some of our customers, which then we start coming back to why we got laser focused on the private market, which, is a lot of COVID inducement related, but it really came down to everybody we started working with. They were just like, hey man, like the stuff that you guys are doing on the tech side, on the data analysis side, this is awesome. And it's great that you can help us find the best cars that are like rolling through the auction lanes or like from our fleet providers. Like we need you guys to go out and find the cars. Like we need them from the private market off the street. Like, how do you help us find those?
It's that hunting model that you kind of had, the bounty model. Yeah.
Yeah. And after like a year and a half of that continuing to come up, it's like, we need to pair everything we've learned on the data and the modeling side and almost go back to our original thesis and go all in on that. It was like kind of the marriage of the two things that we felt really strongly about. It's almost like just COVID and some other things just gave us the additional incentive and kind of punch in the stomach to go all in that direction. So,
no, you know what? I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, and talk about it timely, right? And I think at this point in time, we're still kind of discussing and building and developing strategies and tech kind of around the social impact that COVID has, and what you guys have put together does kind of support that distancing model of, you know, the social impact that we're dealing with right now. You know what the funny though is, I think I've heard a lot of content talking about this, about the social distancing and the impact that it has on our industry. You know what's funny though? I don't hear enough conversation around the economic impact that COVID is going to have. And it seems like, you know, we're all just kind of in this protected bubble right now. We're still dealing with the social impact, and it's like the second shoe hasn't dropped yet. Mm-hmm. And as an industry, we have not dealt with kind of the economics of this. So I know we're kind of veering off, but you brought it up, and I just think it would be kind of a cool topic. Like, how do you see, you know, the economics impact of COVID affecting, you know, the private market and, you know, the dealer market?
Yeah, I mean, on the private market, I mean, you know, if you had asked me about our mission statement like 2 years ago, it was all around like, you know, how do we make these like autonomous environments where cars can be bought and sold? Like, and I still think there's a time and a place for that. And now it's all around like, how do we provide a seller with the most value instantly? And naturally, those are directionally on the same path. But one is very obvious on who we're trying to serve versus the other one. I mean, long term, if you do both of those things, you're creating a ton of liquidity for anybody that owns a car, and you're creating a ton of efficiency in the greater, you know, ecosystem of cars being bought and sold. Because in theory, if cars are being sold at a higher price, people might think you're eliminating the margin. The reality is you're just ensuring that they actually get sold to the right place.
Exactly.
And markets are more efficient in terms of distributing the assets to where they're supposed to go, where right now they're highly inefficient. So anyway, I'll digress off that a little bit. I think like at just like a people level, everybody's trying to make decisions right now that are for the best interests of their family.
Exactly.
You know, 2021, I think, let's call it at least half of it will probably feel a lot like 2020 in terms of, you know, people being really homebound, companies figuring out the best way to get their workforces remote. And I think if you're you know, kind of a normalish suburban, and I don't want to use normal just like everybody's normal, but like just like, hey, you got a family in a house, 2 cars, a couple kids running around. You probably don't need a second car.
That's true. I mean, really, how many people out there are not going to need that second vehicle?
Yeah, and I imagine that, you know, let's say a household income of, you know, 80 to 120 grand, 2 people working professionals, and if they have a second car, that second car would you needed it every day because you had 2 maybe grown adults going in different directions. Now you're both at home. You can stagger, you know, maybe when you're doing things with the kids. Likewise, if you need to run errands or if you want to run to the gym or whatever, it's like there's lots of in-betweens that can fill that secondary void. And the burden of that has not been felt yet. There's a ton of reasons why, but like you said, I think that shoe's going to drop. You have a lot of people that are happy to let that lease come to term, not pick up another car.
Of course.
Maybe they're 3 years into a 6-year term and they will take a loss on it to get rid of it. Like, how do you free up the negative equity in a way where that decision becomes super easy? And then, those are on more of the positive side. I think more on the negative side, a lot of people that are, they're getting crushed financially, whether they were entrepreneurs and their businesses were done, or, you had two people working, maybe you don't have any people working.
Exactly.
That car is not an asset on the balance sheet. You got to get rid of it.
That's so true. I mean, think for like the average person, well, I mean, even business owners or entrepreneurs, anybody out there, right? That vehicle is not an asset. And, we've seen this happen before. We saw this happen in 2008 as, economics at times got tighter, and, it started to kind of come back in as, we felt that financial crunch where, yeah, I mean, you just didn't need that second vehicle. I mean, look, the funny thing is I'm in the exact same boat. I have two vehicles outside. I typically drive 8,000 kilometers a month, approximately 5,000 miles a month is what I drive, right? I'll do an oil change every single month. Almost every dealer in my area knows me. They're like, "Oh, it's time." I'm like, "Yeah, it's time." And that's not the case though. That hasn't been the case for the last 9 months. I probably put more mileage on the first 3 months of 2020 than I did for the rest of 2020 combined. Because of that lack of driving. I mean, what's kind of funny? I see it in the marketing world because that's a side that I work on a lot. Is there's always been this trade up event. We want you to trade up. That's the message, right? I'm actually now seeing downgrade events.
Oh yeah,
where I think dealers are smart. I like this. This is smart, right? This is already kind of having that discussion around. You're driving that larger SUV that's $800 a month. Do you really need that? Or do you need to get downgraded into that 550 smaller, compact SUV? And will that suffice? Or do you just need to sell it altogether? I'm kind of curious on your thoughts of like, the economics is going to change the consumer. It's going to change the industry. But, back in February, during the NADA, before kind of all of this, there was so much conversation around the digital transformation of our industry. And there were some big players that were looking like they were going to invest some monster dollars into what the next version of ownership or the next version of how we interact with cars is, and it seems like a lot of that's stopped, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on it. It's like has COVID slowed down kind of the transformation of our industry?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think it's almost made it more obvious that the legacy way of doing business has an opportunity to continue. Mm-hmm. Like I think if we were having this conversation last year, even knowing about COVID, everything was obviously anything electric vehicles, changing the dealership models, like all these different mobility platforms that were getting launched, like those things felt relatively close. Like,
yes, man, like, very close.
Like in the next 24 months, like you could see, like it wasn't hard to envision like my kids going to school if there was like an Uber for Kids program where I had a subscription where every day I knew there was a car that was going to come pick up my 5-year-old and 3-year-old and get them to school. Like that didn't seem that crazy. Like, I think everybody was kind of on that boat of like, how are these vehicles in an autonomous fashion? Is it going to become more socially acceptable that you're starting to use these platforms for things that you wouldn't have thought of being normal a few years ago? I think COVID rolled all that stuff back to where, maybe that adoption felt like it was 2 or 3 years away. Now it feels like it's 8 to 10 years away again, for whatever reason. I think at the highest levels, a lot of the major manufacturers are changing where they're spending their dollars. They've gotten out of what they would consider like maybe like science projects because the economic conditions are not as safe and secure as they used to be.
No, I
think it has stalled things out a little bit. But I mean, the thing that's kind of crazy in all this is that I was talking to my parents, and like my dad's always joking that, hey, he's seen the end of the world like 5 times between all of the rhetoric that comes out when these things happen. Like, oh, it's the end of the world. Everything is going to change. And he just kind of assured me like, hey, he's like, crazy things happen in the world, and like 6 months to a year later, it's exactly the same as it was before.
Exactly.
And that's actually my prediction, is that the way that dealerships were doing business pre-COVID, by the end of this year, early in 2022, it'll feel more like that than it does to all the futuristic things that we're talking about now.
Yeah, it really did kind of feel like it slowed down. Like it felt like we were right there on the edge, and it feels like COVID. It's not that we've had these micro changes, as far as like communications, digital retailing. I hate that word though. I got to be honest with you. I really kind of hate that word because I still don't think that there's a company out there that truly has nailed down what that really means. It's not just a widget that goes on your website. Like that's not what digital retailing is. But in the macro though, it fundamentally kind of sucked back some of that energy that I felt like we had momentum going as far as what the potential ownership or interaction with a vehicle is. I think losing that momentum in the industry does overly affect, kind of the future of kind of car sales in general. But I'm thinking more from an operations perspective. How do you think that's going to change kind of the future of operations, moving forward? Are we still going to be? And you kind of said we're stuck in kind of that existing one, but it's like how much longer do we have to wait to kind of move into that next section?
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, right? I think on like a dealership operation side, like I'm not even, don't even put me in the bucket of like, this guy kind of knows how they operate. Not a clue. I think for my like observations, I almost feel like there's a similarity between how the dealership world operates that reminds me about a lot of the case studies I read about Blockbuster.
Oh my gosh, that's such a perfect analogy. Please elaborate on.
Like if you I don't know if it was a stockholder like executive summary or what have you, but I recall reading something related to like Blockbuster did this big study on their customers, and it said that people just absolutely loved the experience of walking through the store and seeing all the things on the shelf, and like they just love the experience, and they put so much stock and emphasis in this super internal bias study that it was just like the most obvious portion of confirmation bias you could ever come across. As a someone who I think understands at a fundamental level kind of how automotive as an industry functions, but I still think I have a beginner's mind because I've only been in it a couple of years. I feel like there's this, like, I feel like there's a lot of people set in that stage where they're looking at their own Blockbuster report of like, people love it the way it is. Nobody loves it. Everybody hates it. The customers don't like coming to your store. They just do not. There's nothing about coming to a dealership that anybody enjoys. And a lot of the reasons to why people feel that way, some of them are objective reasons. Most of them are not. Most of them are off of one experience that happened. Yep. But I don't think you can overturn that by basically delivering the same experience, service, and product in a digital format without addressing the other concerns, the underpinnings of why people feel that way. And it's very interesting to think about, like, in America, especially, like, people do like cars. Like, I like cars. I think they're super cool.
We love cars. We love owning them. We love driving them.
Like,
we love cars, modifying them.
Yeah, I like them. I really do like them. It's really hard to think about another product that people like,
that connect that much to. And it just the feeling, the smells, the touch, the sounds, just the colors. It hits so many different senses, right? But I love, because I just want to highlight one thing you just said, because I think it's amazing the way that you kind of molded that together is digitizing the existing experience is not enough to just generate an experience, an elevated experience enough to say that people are going to enjoy buying a car. And this is a big push for me. And I'm talking to a lot of dealer groups, and we're talking about directions. We're talking about for the next 5, 10 years, and it's like, understand that you're not in the car business anymore. You're in the experience business. And once you understand that you're in the experience business, that fundamentally shifts your entire mindset around marketing, operations, customer communications. Hell, that probably even shifts your whole mindset around physical buildings. Is it really necessary to have a $12.5 million Taj Mahal? Does it like so I'm with you. I'm so with you on that. And I love the Blockbuster analogy. In fact, actually, a funny story. The last Blockbuster just recently closed. Did you see that? Did you see that article about it just recently closing? And
I did.
Did you see that Airbnb? You could actually Airbnb the Blockbuster for the night, and you can sleep over in the Blockbuster, and it's so nostalgic, right? But to your point though, I think right now the experience that we're providing, or the way that customers can engage with us, is almost to the point where it's becoming a nostalgic thing. And maybe some people want to hold on to it, but that's not where we can't get to the point where buying a car is a nostalgia thing. We need to be ahead of that. And I think at the end of the day, that's the point you're trying to drive home. No?
Yeah, I think it's part of that. I just think of like, find me another product that people overwhelmingly love, but going to the place where they need to get it, service it, learn about it, they hate it.
That's such a good point.
Like I don't know if you'll find that anywhere else. Like even like let's break it down to like super basic. Like McDonald's. Like as a little kid, like I loved going to McDonald's.
Yes.
The French fries were great, but it was like the experience of McDonald's. Like I would like to think that the affinity towards an American brand like McDonald's is in the similar context to like how someone feels about their brand new car. Like it's a pleasurable event, but even when you're doing everything you can to stay out of there. And this was like pre-Carvana. I mean, I think one of the funniest things is when you break down like Carvana's business model, naturally their dealership is the whole world, which changes the economics of it a little bit. They basically built a business on like, we will buy the cars the same way traditional dealerships buy them. We're going to price them pretty close to the same way other dealerships price them. Our main value add is you don't have to go to a physical dealership. Like they built an $18 billion company on just like not having to leave your house.
So how do you think technology then kind of supports that, right? Because I think right now, as an industry, we have a tendency of just looking at the technology and how the technology is going to fix our experience issues.
Yeah.
And yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily wrong or right to look at it that way, but I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that. Can we expect technology to fundamentally, change that experience? Or is this really something that just we have to look ourselves in the mirror and change it ourselves? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think in all of the wisdom of Jeff Bezos, I mean, he says our customers are never going to want things to come slower or be more expensive.
That is very true.
And when he breaks down a lot of what he's pursuing, it's like, a couple years ago, getting your stuff within 2 to 3 days, like that was acceptable. He's yes. Like, then it was a day, and he's like, now it's same day in a couple hours. Like, again, kind of I'm time boxing of when I moved to Arizona versus living here now, where there's a major distribution center, I believe, like in Glendale, which is probably, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half from where I live. Like this morning, in theory, like if I would have woke up, I could have ordered golf balls, like socks for my kids, and a bag of dog food. That'll be at my house by lunchtime.
Oh man, no, totally right. So take a look at this. I needed an HDMI video capture, a new video capture device. I want to plug in my cell phone and be able to kind of throw it up on my screen from time to time, right? It's just the same as you. I have an Amazon, fulfillment center an hour away. I ordered that this morning. I got it 10 minutes ago.
It's amazing. It's
amazing. Right? Like, isn't that the coolest thing ever? Sorry, I didn't mean go. I don't
want to trivialize like the difference between moving something that weighs 5,000 pounds versus that thing that probably weighs 3 ounces and costs a nickel to make in China.
For sure.
There's obviously tremendous differences there, but I think the way that potentially delivering that type of an experience to a customer is going to require some creativity. Like, if we go back to the example of families, they don't need two cars. Maybe they need one and a half. Well, how do you sell somebody half of a car? We've kind of been down the route of, subscription services, whatever. Like, I'm envisioning like where, I live in a community of like kind of subdivisions that are pieced together. We got an HOA. Like, I'm waiting for somebody to go to like those types of constituents and say, hey, we will rent you a fleet of 15 vehicles that we park at the HOA. And for like a monthly rate, like you can use them for up to, 5 hours a week or something. I think there's going to be different mechanics for delivering those halves. And it could be as simple as that. It could be like where, a more advanced version of Turo, where it's like, hey, you're sharing, like you're agreeing to share that vehicle that you don't use all the time. It'll be parked in your driveway where, you'll let certain people into your network that can share it. And every time, somebody shares it for an hour here, an hour there, like they get billed $6 an hour or something, whatever. And you think about those same types of corollaries with, test driving cars or looking at cars. Like, hey, I want to look at a new 2021 or 22 Tahoe or something.
No, you're 100% right. There's we talked a little bit off camera before we start recording, and this is one that I've been following a lot and actually been working with a little bit, is Kinto. Kinto is Toyota's ride sharing program, which is really impressive in the sense that the technology for the actual ride sharing application is actually installed at the manufacturer level. So these cars are coming off the assembly line with the technology already built into it. I can go on my phone right now. There are 6 locations right now in the Greater Toronto area that I can make a reservation online, pull up, use my phone to unlock the car and start the car, drive off for a few hours, drive back, drop it off, and leave. And so that kind of fulfills that halfway point. But I think for dealers to fulfill that type of experience, that we're not just, I think it's going to go, look, it's going to be a technology factor, but I think what this is it's going to go beyond just kind of that. It's going to even go into like a branding factor, because this is a fundamental, we have to shift this. And, which is actually kind of fun, because you guys have actually just recently gone through a big branding kind of remodeling project. So it's, it's how you express the value that you bring to the customer through your brand. And I think a lot of these existing dealership brands don't necessarily have what it's take to do it. And this is where I see the opportunity for an individual dealership to step in and create that brand. Well, so tell me a little bit about kind of what you guys have gone through right now through some of the shifts that you've made in your guys' own branding efforts.
Yeah, I mean, even like again, probably last year when we met, we were rocking the same colors you were.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
bright orange, trying to get attention. Like apparently that played well. But in like the dealership world, because that was our customer, and it's still a massive customer for us today. As we went out and started partnering, acquiring IP, and being more focused on individuals, people that are basically trying to sell their vehicle, you soften up a little bit. You start going to like blues, a little more pastel, a little more approachable, whatever we want to call it. And we used to have an upside down cone. We thought it was really clever because it's like a funnel. We're funneling all this great opportunity to our customers' doorsteps. Apparently cones aren't great, like worldwide, like they have a negative connotation or a lot. So it's like just stuff like that. You start thinking, being a little more intentional with how you want someone to feel when they see your name, see your logo, even see your colors. Like we want people to feel invited, warm, safe, empathetic, all of those things. And it's been I've never been around either building a product or a service that was catered to, or 100% catered and focused on helping a consumer. So for me, that's been a mental shift. And anytime you're in one of these like dual-sided marketplaces, you're serving two-sided masters, but you also have to know that you have to serve one to get the other, and
100%.
you have to keep the other one happy to create, let's call it a reciprocal ecosystem for everybody. So it's complicated, it's doable, and a lot of other businesses have proven you can do it. But it's definitely a shift that when you really pull the wool back and say who and what are we really trying to serve. You got to be as obvious as you can with that answer. And most, again, at the end of the day, all the good things that we do for a consumer interaction that directly benefits our dealership customers. And I'd be willing to say that the dealerships that we work with today, every day in doing this, they understand that. They're just like, listen, you guys are an advocate for us. We want you guys to keep representing yourself a certain way, because if you do that, we're getting the happiest, healthiest, engaged seller of a vehicle, which if, they openly say it, like, it's our job at that point not to mess it up.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
How do we turn that if the opportunity presents itself into a successful retail customer? Right.
So I love the fact that you use the word intentional. And I think if we can kind of sum up, the entire conversation that we've had today, that would be kind of the underlying theme of everything that we've talked about is to be intentional. Look, an experience doesn't happen on its own. All right. If you want to develop out that new experience and be in the experience business, you need to be intentional. If you're going to build a brand doesn't happen on its own. You have to be intentional about it, right? If you're going to continue to move the needle, of your digital transformation and what your dealership looks like in the next 15 or 20 years, you have to be intentional. I mean, everything kind of comes back to being just intentional in your space and having those conversations. I know we're towards the tail end of our time today, Andrew, and this has been a blast. I've had a lot of fun chatting with you. But before I let you go, though, for everyone that's out there watching and listening right now, and for those who would love to connect with you and kind of follow along with your journey and your company's journey, what's the best way to do so?
No, you bet. I mean, you can find us on LinkedIn. The company name is Drivably, Drivably. Check us out on our website, Drivably.com. If you're someone who's trying to sell a car, go to Drivably.com. If you're a dealer that wants help in buying from the street and connecting with people trying to sell their car, you can send me an email, Andrew@Drivably.com. We're happy to help. But yeah, LinkedIn or our website or my email is going to be a great place to start.
Awesome. Hey, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me today. This has been a ton of fun. You have yourself an amazing day.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Mob podcast with your host, Jason Harris. Don't want to miss new content? Be sure to sign up to Be a Mobster at strategymob.com to stay in the know. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.